My roommate had a rabbit, and that rabbit was an asshole. I was living with 4 people in a poorly converted loft in Brooklyn. The rabbit was Rachel's, although she didn't seem to care for him. She left him in his cage, day in, day out, regularly feeding him and occasionally cleaning up his little circular droppings. The cage wasn't much, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, with metal bars on top and a scooped plastic bottom lined with newspaper. I called the rabbit Bun Bun, although this wasn't its name, but none of my roommates cared enough to correct me. "Do you mind if I let Bun Bun run around the apartment?" I asked Rachel one morning. She advised against it. "He'll just find some weird nook to hide in," she said, "and you'll never get him out." This seemed unlikely to me. To save on money, the loft had been constructed out of as little material as possible. Single pieces of drywall were used between rooms. We hardly had any furniture. There weren't many corners to disappear into. After Rachel left, I removed Bun Bun from his cage and put him beside me on the worn-out futon we used as a couch. I watched TV while the rabbit shit everywhere, burrowed aggressively into my body, and bit me from time to time. He was an asshole. The loft had tall ceilings, so my roommates elected to build 2 levels of rooms lining one wall. Each person had their own 7-foot by 7-foot room on the floor, with an equal-sized room built directly on top. The difference between the upper and lower levels was about 2 feet of head space. The upstairs ceilings were under 4 feet tall, and this was made even shorter by an elaborate sprinkler system that spiderwebbed the entire ceiling. In the end, the second story was a good place to lay in your bed, and that was about it. I moved in a year after the construction was complete and began splitting this arrangement with a boy named Jason Cool, or as I called him, Mr. Cool. He took the bottom room, I took the top. "Is Fletcher home?" Rachel asked one day as I lay in bed. "I don't know," said Mr. Cool. "Look." My room had no door. It took nothing more than a little hop to see me at any time. In addition to my room's thin walls, low ceiling, and lack of door, the loft itself had a number of problems. We had a small window-mounted heater. In the winter, this unit strained to keep the apartment above freezing. But worse than that, the pilot light blew out each time the wind picked up. Relighting the pilot was a struggle in itself, involving one person hanging their body from our 3rd-story window while another person set fire to a piece of paper covered in wax. Possibly due to the loft's regular low temperatures, black mold engulfed an entire wall. Before I moved in, my roommate spent some time trying to keep the mold at bay, but the effort proved to be fruitless and was soon abandoned. The black mold in my bedroom alone was over a 1/4 inch thick in places, so I moved my bed to the corner farthest from its growth and called it a day. "The sprinkler in my room is leaking," Rachel announced one morning. We followed her up the rickety stairs to her lofted bed. Sure enough, black sludge oozed from the ancient pipes that lined our ceiling. The sludge dripped on the floor, missing her comforter by inches. "The water in these pipes is probably like 50 years old," said Mr. Cool. Rachel went down to the kitchen and retrieved a small bucket. She used some rope to attach this bucket to the sprinkler, allowing it to hang just below the leak. "I'll call the landlord," she said when this was done. "Good luck," said Mr. Cool. Little had been fixed by the landlord during my time at the loft. Our toilet broke and it took almost a week to get repaired. I heard rumor of other tenants moving into units with no toilet at all. "He said someone will come by tonight," said Rachel, hanging up her phone. No one was surprised when a week went by and the leak had still not been attended to. It was easy for me to ignore the problems in the loft. I was hardly ever home. I'd been in New York City for maybe 2 years at this point and was completely caught up in the excitement. I'd stay out past last call every night, get home around 5 a.m., and boil some pasta to be eaten plain, no salt, butter, or anything. I'd sleep 8 or 9 hours, eat more plain pasta for breakfast, and be out the door again. The fact that my room was barely big enough for a bed worked perfectly for me. My rent was $200 a month. "The leak's getting worse," said Rachel. She carried her bucket full of sludge down the stairs and dumped it in the sink. "Call the landlord again," I said. Rachel shrugged. "What's the point?" It happened around 7 a.m. An explosion. The amount of water that can be released from a single sprinkler head is awe-inspiring. It enveloped Rachel, sleeping in her bed, and sent water cascading down from the second story of the loft. This unexpected river carried items of Rachel's clothing, books, and small pieces of furniture with it. If Rachel's screaming hadn't woken up the roommates, the thunderous sound of water smashing against plywood could have easily done the job. Within minutes, there was over an inch of water covering the entire floor of our 600 square foot loft. A few minutes later, there were 2 inches. "Help me with these records," screamed Mr. Cool, referring to the 300-plus vinyl records that lined the floor beneath our television. Roommates rushed down to their lower rooms and heaved items off the ground, throwing them on desks and countertops. Rachel's bed was on the opposite side of the loft from mine, and since I was the only one without a room on the ground floor, nothing I owned was actually in danger of being damaged. I sat in the open doorway of my bedroom, stunned, watching madness swirl below me. "Fletcher, get down here and help me!" again screamed Mr. Cool. He tossed a handful of records onto the futon, which was quickly disappearing underwater itself. 3 inches of liquid now rested on the ground. "The landlord's not picking up," hollered Rachel, her phone to her ear. "Call the fucking fire department!" screamed Mr. Cool. Beside Rachel's foot, I saw a power strip completely submerged in water. A lamp, our television, and an old desktop computer were currently plugged into this strip. As the water level reached 4 inches, something else caught my eye. Bun Bun had moved from his normal spot on the floor. The scooped plastic bottom of his cage acted as a perfect hull to his own little boat. The cage bobbed across the loft, being drawn towards the waterfall. I scurried down my steps in t-shirt and underwear and rescued Captain Bun Bun from the high seas. I heaved his cage onto our kitchen counter. "Fletcher, help me!" screamed Mr. Cool for a third time. I looked, but he was no longer near the records. I followed his voice to our front door, where he struggled with the handle. "We gotta pull this thing open," he continued. I got beside him and used my fingertips on the door's edge. Eventually it gave way, allowing water to careen around the door and barrel down the hall. Someone in the distance began to scream. "We're going to put you in the loft next door," said Max, our landlord. He stood by our refrigerator in his traditional Hasidic garb. "Give them a week to redo the floors," Max went on, "and we'll get you right back in here." After the fire department turned the water off, things didn't look too bad. All 300 of those records were destroyed. Rachel's room needed a complete overhaul, and each of the single sheets of drywall used between the lower rooms needed to be replaced. But our lightly furnished apartment was still standing. Then the hardwood floors began to dry. The waterlogged wood expanded as the moisture evaporated. Planks pressed into one another and lifted off the ground when there was no longer room to grow. The floor continued to rise for almost 6 days, eventually buckling and popping when the height became unsustainable. Now our loft was a total mess. "When's next door going to be vacant?" we asked Max. "They're already out," he said. It wasn't just our apartment that got destroyed in the flood. Water raged through the hallways and flowed under the door of all surrounding units. Everyone's floors were as bad as ours, although no one's room looked like Rachel's. Still, some of these tenants were smart enough to get out immediately. "You'll move all your stuff over there tomorrow," Max said definitively. "Here's a key." We need 5 keys, Rachel pointed out. Well, the hardware store's right down the street, said Max. We should have known that 1 week was an exaggeration, an extreme exaggeration. 2 months later, we were still living out of bags. The loft we moved into had no rooms. It had been a photo studio or something of that nature before the flood. Our 5 beds were scattered around the loft in plain sight of each other. Of course, the floor in this apartment had buckled as well, adding to the chaos. Winter came, the temperature dropped, and the heater in this new loft struggled like our last. It's freezing, said Rachel, walking a cup of tea from the stove to her bed. It's supposed to get below 0 tonight. I heard 10 below 0, said Mr. Cool. I sat on my bed wearing my winter coat and drinking a 24-ounce can of Coors. Where are you going? Rachel asked me. There's a big warehouse party on Kent, I said. You guys should come. It's supposed to be really good. Fuck that, said Mr. Cool. I'll go, said Rachel. Maybe they have heat. We bundled up in hats and gloves, long johns and winter coats, and rode our bicycles 20 minutes to the warehouse. That was insane, Rachel said when we arrived. So fucking cold. Inside, the warehouse was not as large as I thought it would be. It appeared more like a loft, but 3 times the size of ours. The lights were dim and maybe 40 people lined the walls. They leaned against finely crafted cabinets and counters made of beautiful dark wood. I opened my 4th 24-ounce can of Coors and went to say hello to a few friends I recognized. It's so fucking cold out, said my friend Bill, his way of greeting. You didn't ride your bikes here, did you? Bill pointed at the helmet in Rachel's hand. We did, I said. You guys are crazy. I hoped the party was just getting started and more folks were on their way, but as the night went on, the number of partygoers only got smaller. It's this weather, said Bill. It's keeping everyone at home. We leaned against an industrial-sized sink in the corner of the warehouse. From where we stood, we could see everyone. Since I got here, all anyone's talked about is this weather, I complained. What else are you going to talk about, said Bill. I'm afraid to go home. I don't want to leave this room. I might call a cab, said Rachel. You guys are being stupid, I pouted. Next to the sink was the lower half of a blender. It was the base, but without the pitcher or blades. I pressed one of the buttons and the motor came to life, making a big noise. People around the room turned their attention towards us. Stop it, said Rachel. I hit the off button and the motor calmed down. While there were no blades, the base still had a component that spun. It was a plastic disc that inserted itself into the bottom of the pitcher when the blender was fully constructed. I found a head of broccoli sitting in a bowl next to the blender and gripped it in my hand. I turned the broccoli upside down and pressed it against the plastic disc. When I held my finger on the pulse setting, pieces of broccoli began flying everywhere. Hey, what are you doing? A man materialized next to me. Stop that, he said, and removed the broccoli from my hand. I turned to Bill and Rachel and said, let's get out of here. Then I threw my empty beer can in the oversized sink. We stood just inside the front door of the warehouse, adjusting our coats and putting on our gloves. I'm heading home, said Bill. No, I demanded. Just come to the bar with us for 1 drink. I'm calling a cab, said Rachel. Nobody's doing that, I said. You can call from the bar. Rachel and I pushed our bicycles down the street with Bill in tow. It's not that bad, I said. Well, you got that big puffy coat on, said Bill. I've only got this pea coat. I'll trade you, I said, unzipping my jacket. Just keep your coat on, said Bill. As I locked my bicycle to a signpost in front of the bar, I turned to Bill and said, Do you dare me to ride my bike home naked? No, said Bill. Do not do that. Inside the bar was pretty empty. It was a place I'd spent many wild nights. I'd once seen a woman, with a pint of beer in her hand, jump from tabletop to tabletop in high heels while the room around her writhed with dancers. Tonight there were only small groups of drinkers nestled into booths. It made me sad. Rachel and I buddied up to the bar. "Hey, Rachel," I said as she got the bartender's attention. "If you buy me a beer, I'll ride my bike home naked." Rachel looked me up and down. "I'll buy you a beer if you promise not to bike home naked," she said. We found a table in the corner and all sat along one side so we could again people watch. As soon as I took my first sip of beer, though, Bill got into it again. "It's never this slow on Friday nights," he said. "It's this weather. People are not going to come out when it's this cold." I drank half my pint in one gulp and stood up. I grabbed my jacket from where I'd placed it on a chair and approached a group of 4 people sitting 2 tables away. "This is yours now," I said, handing them the jacket. "You can have it, for free." I turned away from this group before they had a chance to respond and approached a man sitting alone on a bar stool. I unbuttoned my flannel shirt and held it in his direction. "It's size small," I said, "so it might not fit you, but you can have it." When the customer would not take the shirt from my hand, I placed it on the bar top in front of him. I removed my t-shirt and was now topless. As I passed a group of 3 people sitting in a booth, a man in his early 30s hollered at me. "Hey man," he said, "you going to the beach? What are you wearing?" I'm gonna ride my bike home naked," I said, dropping the t-shirt on their table. "Okay," said the man. He picked up the shirt and threw it in my direction. It landed on the floor. I left my shoes with another group, then threw my socks at Rachel. She took a sip from her drink and finally rose from our table. "These pants are yours now," I said. I was standing in front of a young couple in just my underwear. "He doesn't mean it," said Rachel. "I do mean it," I insisted. I took a few steps away from the table, but then hurried back. "Actually, let me see those pants again for a second." I took the pants, removed my keys from the pocket, and returned the pants to the young couple. "Thank you," I said. I slipped my underwear down my leg, used my foot to fling them across the bar, and was out the door. Rachel found me halfway home, bent over my bicycle, trying to get the chain back on the sprocket. It was not common for my chain to fall off, and I have no recollection of how this happened. Maybe I crashed. I woke in my bed in the middle of the strange loft we'd been living in. Still drunk, I looked at the bed surrounding me and noticed none of my roommates were home. I unzipped the sleeping bag I used as a blanket and rose in t-shirt and underwear. I checked the clock beside me. It was 11:20 in the morning and I was scheduled to be at work by noon. I rushed to the bathroom, urinated, drank a large glass of water, then inserted my contact lenses. I walked to the chair on which I usually piled my clothing before going to bed, and, of course, it was empty. It was at this moment that my behavior from the night before came back to me. Keys, I asked myself. Where would I put my keys? I dug through the piles of bags that surrounded my bed and came up with nothing. I checked the front door and then proceeded to go through Rachel's things for a while. The time was now 11:30. I would not get my first cell phone until 2 years later, so there were no calls to be made. Most upsettingly, when I'd given away my pants, I'd also given away my wallet, which contained all of my money, as well as my pass to ride the subway. Without my keys, I could not unlock my bicycle. Walking to work was an option, but it would take me well over an hour. I put on 2 sweatshirts and a jean jacket to make up for my lost winter coat, then stepped into the hallway. I shut the door behind me knowing, without my keys, there was no turning back. We lived in an industrial section of Brooklyn. Almost all of the buildings around us were working factories, although a few besides our own had been turned into residential lofts. There was a corner market across the street from our apartment, and that was about it for stores. I walked towards my work, passing factory after factory. It was the weekend, so most of them were closed. The temperature outside seemed to have improved greatly from the night before, but maybe that was because I was still drunk. I was hungry, and my thoughts turned to a small cafe that sat 10 minutes in the opposite direction from my work. Although they didn't frequent the cafe, it occurred to me that my roommates may have gone there for breakfast, and in a spur-of-the-moment decision, I began running in that direction. There he is! My roommates clapped and whistled as I entered the cafe. The naked man, teased Mr. Cool. Everyone taking this rare sight of him wearing clothing. How are you feeling? Asked Rachel. I looked at her and asked, Do you have my keys? My heart raced from the running I had just done. Rachel dug in her pocket. I do have your keys, she said, jiggling them in the air. I also have your pants and your jacket and your shirt if you want those things. I know you were pretty dead set on giving them away last night. You have my pants? I exclaimed. Yeah, I left them near the sink in the kitchen, Rachel went on. You didn't see them? I arrived at work 20 minutes late, and no one thought anything of it. I was working retail, selling pants and shirts I knew nothing about. I took off my jacket and sat down in the break room. It was the first quiet moment I'd had since I woke up. My heart was still beating rapidly, as it had when I arrived at the cafe. I took a deep breath to calm myself down, but a sharp pain caused me to exhale suddenly. I slowly took another breath, but the pain returned. My already rapid heart rate increased. One of my coworkers entered the break room, and I guess I wasn't looking so good. Are you all right? She asked. I don't know, I said, while taking short, sharp breaths. Something's going on with my lungs. I tried to inhale, and my chest felt like it was ripping apart. My coworker knelt beside me. I rode my bike home naked last night, I said. What? Exclaimed my coworker. Do you think you have pneumonia? My uncle had pneumonia, and he was in the hospital for 2 weeks. Is he okay? I asked. Yeah, she said, but he owes like $50,000 in medical bills. Now my heart was racing. I tried to take a breath, but my lungs weren't having it. My peripheral vision began fading to white. I knew I was about to pass out, so I dropped to the floor and laid my head on the ground. When I came to, someone was on the phone with 911. No ambulance, I said, still laying on the floor. I have no insurance. Do not call an ambulance. Soon my coworkers surrounded me, telling me stories of every lung-related illness they'd ever had in a strange attempt to make me feel better. My boss gave me the day off and insisted that I go straight to the emergency room. Instead, I took a train to 23rd Street. There was a walk-in clinic next to the Chelsea Hotel that only charged $50 a visit. You have pleurisy, said the doctor. Like in the Oregon Trail, I asked? The doctor slowly shook his head. Have you ever played the computer game Oregon Trail? I continued. People are always dying of pleurisy. Do you know what pleurisy is? Asked the doctor. Now I was shaking my head. You've damaged the outer lining of your lungs. This lining allows your lungs to comfortably expand against your rib cage. Yours is swollen and it's causing you discomfort. I'm going to prescribe you 800 milligrams of ibuprofen to be taken 3 times a day. The swelling should go down in a week or so. Much like the time frame given to us by our landlord, 1 week was an exaggeration. An extreme exaggeration. After the floors were replaced, Rachel's room rebuilt, and new drywall added to the lower rooms, we moved our stuff back into the old loft. Here, Fletcher, let me get that. Mr. Cool took a large box from my hands. Thanks, I said. My roommates had watched me for the last month, struggling to find comfort in something as simple as laying down. Moving around was a whole other problem. Mr. Cool helped me heave my mattress back into my room. I took 4 Advil, then curled in a little ball while laying in bed. "Knock, knock," said Rachel, rapping on the wall of the room below mine. "Can we come up?" I saw the heads of all my roommates appear in my open door. "Here," said Rachel, "plug this in." She handed me a light bulb. "It's a happy light," she went on. "It produces light that's like the sun." She looked at me as I held the bulb, still in its box. "You haven't left your room in 2 months," Rachel pointed out. After my roommates had dispersed, I made my way down to the kitchen and boiled some pasta. I ate it plain, no butter, salt, or anything. Before returning to my room, I removed Bun Bun from his cage and carried him up my sketchy staircase. I put him next to me on my bed, where he proceeded to shit everywhere, burrow aggressively into my body, and bite me from time to time. As winter turned to spring, the discomfort in my lungs diminished, but there was still a sharp pain when a cold breeze blew my way. My mom bought me a scuba diving vest that I could discreetly wear under a t-shirt to protect my lungs. It provided another layer between me and the elements. As time went on, I figured out little tricks to comfortably get by. A year passed and I lucked into some health insurance. This was a rare occurrence for me in my adult life, so I decided to go see a specialist. "The pleurisy was 2 years ago and it's still hurting?" asked the specialist. "That's very strange." They put me in a giant glass cube where they monitored my breathing. I don't know what the cube told them, but it looked like a mid-century modern art installation. "I can't see any problems," said the specialist, "but I'm going to prescribe you some steroids, see if we can't get things moving along." More time passed, and I finally moved out of the loft. I'd given it 4 years of my life. Now I found myself living in a dank, moldy basement. This might seem foolish for someone with my lung problems, but this room was the largest, quietest space I'd ever had to myself in my entire life. Of course, it didn't take more than a couple of months before things started going poorly. "It's my 4th bronchial infection in 4 months, I told my friend Jackie as we walked down the sidewalk on a sunny day. I went into a coughing fit and hacked something up. "I'm going to have to get on antibiotics again," I went on. "That cough sounds terrible," Jackie said. "Yeah," I agreed. "Allergies are making it even worse." After Jackie left, I started hacking, trying to release phlegm that seemed lodged just below my esophagus. As I coughed with all my might, I felt something rip open in my chest, just as it had the morning after my foolish bike ride. I tried to inhale, but my lungs refused to expand. My pulse increased, and I felt myself getting lightheaded. My eyesight again faded at the peripheral of my vision. By this point, I owned a cell phone. I used it to call my brother Matt. "Should I run the red light?" screamed Matt as he navigated his van through the East Village. I sat in the passenger seat, writhing in pain. I don't know," I repeated, twisting one way and then another, trying to get some air into my body. The light turned green, and my brother slammed on the gas. Moments later, we arrived at the next light. At this point, my arms and legs were shaking wildly. They lifted on their own if I didn't use my muscles to bring them back down. "How far away is the emergency room?" I asked. "I don't know," said Matt. 20 blocks, maybe? I gasped for breath. The light turned green, and my brother stepped on the gas again. We were halfway down the block when he suddenly cut the wheel and nearly drove onto the sidewalk before bringing the van to a stop. "What are you doing?" I asked. Matt jumped out of the van and began knocking on the window of a police cruiser parked on the street in front of us. "Hello," he said. "I need help." As Matt peered through the empty window of the police car, I looked up and noticed a small bus parked in front of the cruiser. The bus was illustrated with pictures of kittens and puppies. "Adopt a new pet today," was written above these illustrations. "Can I help you?" Two police officers approached my brother from the sidewalk. Each of them was holding an adorable little puppy. "Hi," Matt said. "My brother's in the car and he can't breathe. Can you turn on your siren and escort us to the emergency room?" "Have you given him the Heimlich maneuver?" asked one of the police officers while lightly petting the puppy in his hands. "He's right there," said my brother, pointing at me. I waved from the van. "Do you need us to call you an ambulance?" the officer went on. "Can you just escort us to the emergency room?" my brother asked again. "I can't legally take you up there," said the officer, "but I can call an ambulance." "It's fine," said my brother, rushing to the van's door, which hung open in the street. "I'm just going to run all the red lights." He jumped in the driver's seat and put the van in gear. The police officers were still holding the puppies as we sped away. If I thought the police officers were indifferent, it was nothing compared to the receptionist at the emergency room. She sat behind 2 layers of thick glass and handed my brother a clipboard through a small slit in the window. "Fill out these papers and take a seat," she told my brother. I lay on the floor at his feet, gasping for breath. Still, being at the hospital soothed me. I was happy to know that, if I stopped breathing completely, at least there was someone knowledgeable around to watch me die. We took a seat with about 30 other New Yorkers waiting to be admitted. As my brother filled out the paperwork, the convulsing in my arms and legs slowed down and eventually stopped. Soon I was able to take short breaths without too much discomfort. Unfortunately, my health insurance had long expired. As my brother returned the clipboard, I worried what this would cost me. "I have bunions," screamed a woman, knocking on the receptionist's window. "I need to see a doctor." "I have bunions too," cried another woman. She joined the first woman in front of the receptionist. It was clear that these women were prostitutes, but it's hard to pinpoint the exact qualities that made it so evident. "Do you have an ID?" asked the receptionist with the same indifferent tone she had used with my brother 10 minutes earlier. "I have bunions," said the first woman again. She removed her shoe and pushed her bare foot through the slot from which we'd received our clipboard. Eventually, a man approached the window with another prostitute. He grabbed the first woman by the leg and brought her foot back down to the floor. "Give me whatever paperwork I need," he said, leaning low, talking directly into the slot. "I'm getting all my girls taken care of today." As the receptionist organized a number of papers on a clipboard, the man pulled out a roll of money and began counting it in front of the whole room. For what purpose, I do not know. After blood was taken and my chest x-rayed, I sat on a hospital bed speaking with a doctor. "I don't know what's going on with you," said the doctor, "but I don't think it's pleurisy. I can prescribe you antibiotics for that cough and a regimen of steroids that might move things along." Later that month, I convinced one of my new roommates to trade my large, quiet basement room for his tiny, loud bedroom on the first floor. Neither room had a window, but my lungs seemed to favor being above ground. 2 years passed before I found myself again curled in a ball on a doctor's table. This time things were different, though. I was experiencing agonizing stomach pains. I raced over to the walk-in clinic next to the Chelsea Hotel where they did a number of tests. They took my $50 and sent me home to await the results. However, when I woke the next morning, the pain had escalated. I lay on the floor of my apartment crying, unable to get out of the fetal position. My brother met me with his van, and we again sprinted through the city on our way back to the Chelsea clinic. I tried not to bring up the idea of stomach cancer, but it weighed heavy on my mind. "Hello," said the doctor. "How are you feeling today?" My body was curled in a ball on the examination table. I squirmed, moving one knee over the other, trying to find a position that alleviated some pain. "I'm okay," I said out of habit, although this was clearly not true. The doctor grabbed an office chair from in front of a computer and wheeled it next to me. When she sat down, our heads were almost at the same level. "We got back some of your test results from yesterday," she said. "From what I see," she turned for a moment and looked at a computer behind her, "things seem to be okay." The doctor held out her hand as if she was going to touch one of my squirming arms, but then she brought it back to her side. "Fletcher," she said, "I think you're very, very stressed out." I nodded enthusiastically. I'd barely slept the night before. The room around me was pulsating. "No," she said, leaning forward in her chair so her face was close to mine. "I don't think there's anything physically wrong with you. I think you're just very, very stressed out." Outrage flooded my body. How had I, in this moment of excruciating pain, stumbled upon a doctor that was this ignorant? Tears rolled down my face. My brother had already contacted my parents, and they were making plans to get to New York as soon as possible. As I lay on the examination table, angry and scared, the doctor began to explain some of the physical symptoms your body can generate under duress. And the funny thing was, like my time in the emergency room, watching those prostitutes demand salvation from their bunions, the shaking in my body slowed down, and eventually I was able to sit up without too much discomfort. The doctor spoke for another minute or two, recommended therapy, and then went on her way. I paid another $50 on my way out the door and found my brother outside, sitting in the driver's seat of his van. This began the long journey of understanding what my brain can do to my body. Don't be fooled into thinking that the pain wasn't real. The pain was physically there. It was just being generated by tension in my muscles, tension I brought on myself. I learned that we all hold a large amount of tension in our bodies, and that this tension can make some tasks difficult. I wake most mornings with anxiety. I don't know why, but the tension caused by this anxiety often makes eating breakfast difficult because my stomach is so tight. I can sit there with a bowl of food for an hour, just trying to get it down. Like wearing that scuba vest under my t-shirt to protect my lungs from the cold, I learned workarounds for dealing with this tension. Before the doctor at the Chelsea clinic diagnosed my anxiety, I developed strange behavior that seemed to ease the mysterious pain in my stomach. After I understood that this pain was derived from tension, I developed a whole new set of strange behaviors focused on calming the anxiety. I found that I had some control over the tension, although not that much. It took over a year before I realized that what was happening in my stomach might be related to what was happening in my lungs. It seems odd now that it didn't occur to me right away, but after you've found your own weird solution to a problem, it's just easy to go on using that solution forever. But suddenly I realized that if a cold wind blew, I could focus on keeping the muscles in my chest loose, and no pain would arise. Unfortunately, this is still not a natural act for me. If I lose my focus and let my mind wander, my chest muscles tighten and again bring me the discomfort. Because of this, I usually bring a sweatshirt with me everywhere I go, even on the hottest days of summer. Carrying a long-sleeve shirt is, of course, easier than rewiring your brain. I'd like to say that I'm improving my relationship with this tension, but really I've just found a balance between knowing what it is, having a couple of quirky solutions when it escalates, and basically white-knuckling it when it gets bad. Still, it's a weight off my mind to know that my body isn't actually in danger. A big problem with anxiety-based pain is that it's circular, particularly when you don't understand the root of the problem. The anxiety starts the pain, and the pain brings on more anxiety, and the heightened anxiety generates more pain. It's this loop that can land you in the emergency room. Once I understood that the core of my pain was anxiety, everything around me got better. It's not a perfect ending, but it's happier than some. Take poor Bun Bun, for instance. After my lungs improved, I resumed my life, coming home at 5 a.m. every night and running out the door just after waking every morning. There was just too much living to do. Bun Bun, on the other hand, went back to the isolation of his cage. That is, until Mr. Cool brought home a new pet. Bill Murray. Bill Murray the Pit Bull. Mr. Cool had been talking about a dog for quite some time, and the day had finally come. He felt a wave of excitement as he reached our front door, ready to show Bill Murray his new home. Mr. Cool had a 30-pound bag of dog food in one hand and the dog's leash in the other. He fumbled with his keys as he balanced these two items, eventually getting the door open and ushering Bill Murray inside. Before Mr. Cool placed the dog food on the kitchen counter, Bun Bun was gone. Bill Murray had knocked the rabbit's cage over and used his teeth to shake Bun Bun to death. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Strangely, our landlord met a similar fate. 6 years after I moved out of the loft, our landlord, Max, found himself $1 million in debt to a Russian loan shark. He started writing unlawful cashier's checks to pay off personal debts and stopped paying the construction workers that were quickly building his new properties. Eventually, a few of these construction workers kidnapped Max, hoping to ransom him for the money they were owed. But the whole ordeal ended with Max's suffocated body being removed from a dumpster. My fate was less grim. No dogs or loan sharks, no stomach cancer, pneumonia, or even bunions. I have anxiety that causes me tension, and tension that causes me pain. But at least the pain reminds me that I'm still alive. So that's the kickoff to Season 2. I hope you enjoyed it. I've got 5 new episodes coming at you in the next few weeks. This season's much more intensive than the last. Most of the episodes are close to an hour long. And this season I'm asking for financial support from you listeners. It's really up to you how much you want to give. If you're able to give $5 for the 5 episodes, that'd be great. But if that's more than you have to spare, a smaller amount is totally fine and also very appreciated. But anyone who supports with $10 or more will receive a bonus full-length podcast episode, as well as a 30-song album of outtakes and rarities from the Fletcher C Johnson catalog. All money can be sent to me directly through Venmo. My Venmo is @Fletcher C Johnson. Or you can send it to me through PayPal. My PayPal is FletcherCJohnson@gmail.com. The money will help give me a little more time to keep creating new episodes for you. If you sent $10 or more, please include your email address in the notes with the payment so I can send you all that bonus stuff. You may have noticed that I removed Season 1 from the podcast players. I'm still really proud of that first season. First off, as far as I know, I'm still the first person to ever release an album serially through a podcast. Even if I only technically did 4 of the 12 songs from the album, because making the episodes ended up being way more intense than I thought it was going to be. But that's still cool in itself. But besides that, also, I think the episodes were great. It's just that it took me to the end of the first season to figure out what I really wanted to do with a storytelling podcast. The first season is centered around the release of my last album, which is interesting, although certainly not the most compelling stories from my life. But what really changed with Season 2 is the way I craft the stories. From the beginning of Season 1, I set out to make a podcast. I love podcasts, and I was trying to sculpt my own by using elements from other well-produced shows that I loved. Using audio elements and cool audio-based storytelling tricks, and approaching it from an audio standpoint. But when I got to the last episode of season 1, the last episode that I wrote and recorded, which was Portland, I didn't try to think about any of the audio-based storytelling. I just wrote a short story. I've been writing short stories, both fiction stories and true stories, since I was in high school. Particularly in the last decade, I've written a lot of short story fiction. With the Portland episode, I wrote a true short story exactly how I would write it for the page. I didn't think about the audio at all. And then I approached it from the audio side after the story was already in front of me. And that ended up being my favorite episode. And some listeners told me that was their favorite episode as well, which was really cool. In the end, that ended up being what I really wanted to do. Partly because that was what I was already good at. So this season, you're getting 5 short stories from my life, and I'm really excited about them. All the episodes from season 1 are still available on my YouTube channel if you want to go back and listen. Obviously, that Portland episode is the one that's closest to my heart. Maybe I'll put season 1 back on the podcast players eventually. I don't know. Tell me what you think. Hit me up on any of the social medias. It's just me out here alone trying to figure out what to do with this thing. Likewise, if you know anyone who might dig this kind of storytelling, please tell them about listening to Fletcher C Johnson. I could truly use all the help I could get. Next week's episode finds me living in the woods with a bunch of cool freaks, and things just get weirder from there. You've been listening to Fletcher C Johnson. I'm Fletcher C Johnson. Thanks for listening.